begins in 3, 2, 1.
Good morning, good evening, good night, wherever you may be listening, whenever you may be listening. College Lacrosse Live. I'm sitting with Zack Capozzi. I'm Coach Q, and we got ourselves a bracket. We got ourselves a bracket a little bit early last night. Niche making a lot of fun of what went down prior to the selection show on both the men's and the women's side, but a lot going on. We're going to have some Made Madness. We have a bracket challenge for you guys as well. Zach setting that up for us, but dude, what's happening? What's going on in your neck of the woods?
For the first time all year, we have no bracketology segment.
That's true. We were doing it January 31st, and now we're sitting in May. No bracketology, but we do have a bracket, so it's exciting. You heard it here first. Duke was going to make it to the Ncaa final. I think that's what Zach said every episode. No, I'm just kidding. We had a lot go on, obviously. We also have a D3 grit segment we want to get to. Obviously, the D3 side of things had their brackets set up as well, so I'm going to bring that up. Some interesting things over there. Again, CNU right down the road for me, a heartbreaking loss. I mean, you're talking about Salisbury CNU back and forth every year, but the monkey on the back of CNU is they can't win that conference championship.
Right.
They went up 9-3 and did not score in the second half or overtime, lost to Salisbury in overtime. Just, I mean, that's a brutal heartbreaker, but they have the tournament to look forward to, like a lot of folks. Zach, anything like you want to talk about here early in the show as we get started? I mean, we're going to dive into all the seeding, the reactions, all that stuff, but anything just you want to get off your chest before we get started?
No, I mean, it was the craziest part of this weekend was we also had the like drop of the like Lars's new selection criteria that kind of like was a little bit of a bombshell coming into the conference tournament. So I was like, so yeah, it's just like all the things that happened this weekend. Then we also have this like maybe we're gonna have a new selection algorithm next year. Unclear. So it was interesting.
I would like to hear this. We had a couple breaking pieces, so I want to hear what Lars had to say. We do have also the post-game interview with him. We also have a interview with Terry Foy. He just put out this podcast over on InsideLacrosse.com. It was with a member of the selection committee here after they put out, obviously, the seedings last night. So I want to dive into some quotes early on from that. Did anything stand out to you, Zach, from a perspective of using the RPI, or I know the discussion between us was what credentials were they going to use, what precedents were they going to try to set? Did anything stand out like where you're just like, whoa, that's not what I was expecting, or was this kind of, did they use the precedents they should use?
Yeah, I mean, I think, listening to the commissioner's comments and what he said about Duke, I think was interesting that they really didn't really focus on the quality of Duke's wins, and they focused on the lack of the bad losses and that sort of thing. I mean, so I think it's interesting because, to me, it's always interesting when you have the committee being kind of forced to take a stand on something and say, okay, when we considered Duke, it was, the fact that they didn't have bad losses and that they had a top 5 win was really kind of what they focused on, not as much about, because you have other teams that maybe had more top 20 wins or whatever. So, it's I always think it's interesting when the committee will say, this is the data that we use to make the decision. Now, whether that's really how that decision went down the room or not, who knows? But
Sure.
it's always interesting when you have them on the record saying this is the data that we looked at.
All right. Sorry for getting started late here today. I know we started about an hour past time of our usual. I'm getting married next year, or next month. Hopefully it's not next year. But I was checking out some things earlier today, so that was why we had a pushback session. So please get off my back, guys. Come on. I get one. Hopefully. Travis Travis said terrible precedent rewarding Duke for their awful non-conference schedule. Maryland and Harvard played the big boys and were dinged. Daniel saying, agree with Gravitate. Maryland beat Virginia, and Virginia is for real. I just saw them tear it up North Carolina in the ACC. Also disappointed in SU as they did not bring their best game in the ACC tournament. UVA and Princeton are both playing on another level. So, look, a lot to touch on. That's what we've got this show for. Let's jump into the selections show, though, because if you guys didn't know, if you were living under a rock, we basically had a leak by some NCAA intern, is what we're going with, of the selection show. So right when selection show went live, Ncaa addressed it on the show. Let's jump in.
We know you have the internet, but listen, the watch parties, they're still fun. You gather, you hear your name called. It's part of what makes May, May. 18 teams will hear their name called tonight. They're playing for one trophy. We will crown a champion on Memorial Day. All roads lead to Charlottesville and championship weekend. And with that, we say hello, Anish Shroff, Hulk Arcatera, the Pompadoured, Quint Kesnick. Yeah, I know. It's out there. Hard to hide from it. It's out there. We get it. But for those of you who don't have Wi-Fi or, maybe just like to indulge in faux suspense, we'll get to it. Listen, if you want to see the bracket, you can. But, Kark, here's what I like about this field. The season's been wide open. This tournament should be wide open. It should be.
Great piece there that Anish left off with is that the wide openness of this tournament. I know you're doing a bracket challenge. I'm actually going to put this bracket challenge here both in the description post episode as well as in the chat here now for you guys if you want to participate. But tell us a little bit about this bracket and what you're seeing early on, Zach, from just the data and what you're getting on this being a wide open field, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the bracket challenge and the kind of the distribution of picks, like last year, Cornell was the pretty heavy favorite. 48% of the people that submitted a D1 bracket, and there's a bracket challenge for every division, but just looking at the D1 bracket last year, 47% of the brackets had Cornell winning it. It's early. We still have a lot of brackets to be submitted, but so far, the most popular pick to win it all is only at 37%. And so I think it's, we've heard all year this is wide open. And I think so far, you're seeing that in the way that people are reacting to the bracket and who they've got, advancing out of those pods and who they have winning it. And so, I think that sets us up for an exciting tournament, right? Last year, it felt like we would have been surprised to see certain things happen. The top two teams that were picked, to win it all were the two teams that were in the finals last year. It was a little bit more predictable maybe. And so I think, so far that's not the case with this one. And I think that sets up for an exciting field.
All right. And we've got the May Madness bracket challenge. I dropped the D1 piece. Let me drop the D2 as well here. But basically what can people do on this bracket challenge over here on Lax Reference?
Well, if you're familiar with March Madness, it is exactly the same, right? You can set up a group if you want to compete against individuals. I know a lot of teams use that as a fundraiser, or you just compete on your own and fill out a bracket and see who comes out on top. I will say, who the top six, the winners of each of the six divisions, free subscription to the pro site for a year. So there's a little bit of a reward there for being an effective picker. And I will say, if all you want to do is kind of print out a graphic of your picks, you don't even have to enter. You can just fill it out, and then there's like a little download button. You can get a little graphic of your picks to post wherever you want. So it's a nice little interactive tool to be able to get your picks on the record. And everybody loves March Madness, and why shouldn't lacrosse have May Madness?
Let's bring a little bit of May Madness into the fold here. Appreciate that, Zach. All right, we're going to get started here looking at the field, kind of what we saw with the reactions to just where everybody was seated, right? There was a couple seating interesting pieces to get to. Specifically, I mean, right up front, you're talking about Princeton getting the number 1 seed over Notre Dame, UNC getting it over Richmond as well. Like, those are things we definitely want to hop into. Before we do that, though, there is also a D3 bracket challenge. I'm going to bring up the D3 graphic here for you guys. So this is the 2026 NCAA D3 Men's Lacrosse Championships. I know that's a little bit tough for you guys if you need to zoom in. I don't, I don't blame you guys. But basically what we have here, as I pull this up on my own screen, is, I believe, Bowdoin and Tufts taking the top spot. So Bowdoin 16-1 here, Tufts 17-1 at the end of the season. Tufts beating Bowdoin in their final, clash here at the end of the season. RIT not getting a top seed for the first time in what feels like a long time. So they're going to be potentially matched up with Salisbury once it gets to the third round matchup. We got some others, obviously, that need to take place. Anything stand out for you, Zach, on the D3 side of things?
I mean, I do want to toot Lax Elo's horn a little bit, because I printed out after Bowdoin beat Tufts, the model still had Tufts as the number 1 team, right? They were, still the strongest for Lax Elo. They still had the strength of record stuff. I got a lot of grief. Bowdoin just beat Tufts. They should be number 1. Tufts can't be number 1. They just lost. And, they played again and it was not close. So, the model is always going to react less than people want it to. So there's a little bit of that baked in, but hey, Tufts is back where they were at the start of the year as the favorite, I think you'd have to say.
Yeah, 100%. We'll see how that plays out. Obviously, it feels like the D1 side of things is a little bit more wide open. That happens, that just the way that it's shaken out, in the past. But Salisbury, again, we have Bowdoin here with a solid ranking. We've got Babson with a solid ranking, RIT. Yeah, I mean, we'll see how.
I think you'd have to say at this point that, there's a lot of games to be played, but another Tufts Bowdoin game in the title game would be a pretty cool way to end the season. We'll see if the fates of chaos will allow it to happen.
All right. Well, this is happening this week as well, so we'll be monitoring those games as they progress. All right, we've got a big game and big tilt that we want to start out with. This is post game from Lars. UVA has been one of the most just up and down and volatile teams this past season. So we're going to start with them. They just have been on a tear to end their campaign. And honestly, winning the ACC tournament, it obviously does not get you an AQ, but it's going to get you a lot of respect. I mean, if they had not won this game, they were still in. I think they got to the championship game. That was going to be there. Whether they crashed out in the first round, maybe that puts them on the bubble, but I don't even think then. Obviously, they don't have to worry about anything they're in. Here's Lars.
Coach Tiffany, your first ACC championship since 2019. This Virginia team looked left for dead after you all lost to Towson, then an overtime loss to Maryland. What changed?
Yeah, we weren't playing very good lacrosse, were we? And I coach great men, really talented lacrosse players, and you got to see that on display today. Jake Merrick has been playing exceptional lacrosse. We were single digit with our saves, for the first half of the season. And in that Maryland game, you saw him make some big saves, especially late in the game, in the triple overtime. And the rest of us are just really stepping up our play. And I mean, Griff Meyer, what a day today against one of the nation's best, really. And so it's a credit to Drew Sunderland, John Schroeder, and Joey Terenzi, what they're doing. The Millen brothers are playing fantastic lacrosse, and it's great to have a good goalie.
Operating on all cylinders. Well, congratulations. We'll see you in the NCAA tournament.
Thank you, Dana.
All right, so UVA is in. They trounced North Carolina 16-6. We're going to get to that game right now, and then I want to touch on some of the others that were left out of the field here. Virginia against not sneaking in, kind of blowing the door open there at the end. What did you make of this ACC championship, Virginia's run to this title?
Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of teams that are playing better, and I think at this point it's fair to say that all that early season stuff is pretty much in the rear view, right? They lost that game against Carolina a couple weeks ago, and since then they've had 3 sub 20% adjusted efficiency games on the defensive end, while the offenses continue to do what that offense has continued to do. So, I think if they're going to be in a situation where that defense is going to be, 10% against Carolina after allowing 28% a couple weeks ago. I mean, to the extent that they figured out something on defense, and like he said, Merrick, maybe, whatever he's figured out, it's a tough team. And to see the defensive numbers come down so much over the course of the season, and then you've got the face-off numbers ticking up, like it's a scary group.
You talk about the end of their season, right? In as opposed to the beginning, you look at the schedule. They had 4 losses in their first 8 games. And then after that Maryland game, there was a viral clip or semi-viral clip of John Tillman saying, or Lars saying, hey, this is going to be turned around. I saw a lot of fight in this group. It might not have shown it on the scoreboard, but our season's turning around. And literally, there's no other way to put that other than UVA just going on an absolute tear here. Which one would you say is a bigger win? Notre Dame, just from an eye-opening perspective, Notre Dame 10-15 in the semis, or UNC 16-6 in the ACC championship?
Ooh, I mean, interesting. I mean, probably Notre Dame, right? They were a team that was starting to look like they might be, not juggernaut, but like, hey, the way that they had come out and kind of played at the end of the season, like the games that they had put together, that one flipped the narrative. Carolina, has not had the strongest end of the season, and so I think there's an element of, that wasn't as much of a surprise. Now again, Virginia had knocked off Notre Dame earlier in the season too, so maybe that narrative didn't necessarily change things as much, but I think there are probably some people that were expecting Notre Dame to have a little bit better shot at Virginia the second time around. So the fact that they didn't, and it was ended up a larger margin of victory, I think that one stands out a little bit more.
McCabe Millen leading UVA over UNC, 6 points. Truett Sunderland with 5. The rest of the cast there as well. You didn't see Owen Duffy here on this top performer list for North Carolina. He did get hurt. That's a narrative to be watching for North Carolina. He pulled his hamstring in this one, and whether he comes back, I mean, hamstrings are a funky injury, man. Probably the most funky injury you could have. Jake Merrick having 76% in the goal before he was pulled late in the game. So, I mean, look, ACC winner 2026 UVA. If you had told me that in March timeframe, February timeframe, I would not have believed you. Congrats to Lars and his staff. Now, UVA going on this run, probably, if they had crashed out in the first game, does Harvard get in? Does Maryland get in?
I think the way the bubble turned out, that all those teams lost, right? I mean, if Maryland had not, lost that game to Penn State, and UVA had lost their first game, like, yeah, probably they're probably not going to be in. So but I think the way things turned out, where everybody lost and the bubble was kind of a weak bubble, I think UVA is probably still okay if they had lost that game to Notre Dame. I mean, they're not penalizing teams for losing to Notre Dame in the selection show. So, I think they probably would have been fine at the end of the day. Now, if they had lost that first game and then they still had to watch all those other teams play, they probably would have been a little nervous. But I think, the way it turned out, they were probably good either way.
All right, let's jump into that. I know I kind of jumped the gun here on the ACC game. ACC is going to be one of the ones that we're really focused on throughout the season, but we're going to touch on these other conferences. Let's hit on AQ misses, bubble in, bubble out. So UVA didn't really have to worry. You had some AQs that went awry, I would say, quickly. Last episode, I was really on Utah's bandwagon. You were saying, hey, Jacksonville, watch out for Jacksonville. I said, no, Utah, Jacksonville in the final. Utah is going to pull it out. No way. Utah didn't even get to the final. They were upset here. And, Jacksonville kind of ran away with the A-Sun there against Air Force. So give me a little bit about these AQs that kind of had misses. Towson, another one, not winning the CAA for the first time in I don't know how many years. Here, but yeah, tell me about some of these teams that ended up losing out on the AQ side, and then we can make it to the bubble.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Siena was the team, everybody kind of rooting for them. I think so, to see them fall to Marist. I mean, that's credit to Marist, right? Like, they did what they needed to do. I think that's one where you look at Siena maybe as a story that would have been kind of cool to see them, have some postseason success. I think Robert Morris, we've talked about them quite a bit as far as like, that was a team that was left for dead after those first couple of weeks, and they've just continued to kind of run through the latter half of the season, latter 3/4 of the season. So to see Robert Morris kind of close it out and get that AQ is pretty cool. Albany, they had that game we talked about against NJIT, and so then you're sort of like, oh, that's not a great vibe to go into the conference tournament with, but they pulled it out in the America East, and so they'll be there. I think Jacksonville and Army are kind of an interesting one because I think there's both a little bit, and I'm sure they would tell you that this is irrelevant, but we always think about stories and narratives, and how many times has Jacksonville been the toast of the early season? It's, oh, this team's really got something. They've got a great goalie. They've got a shot. This is a team we could look for in March. And then they don't do it, right? And then, Army in kind of that same boat. A lot of years, it's like, could Army get in at large? They've had a couple big wins and they've got a shot. This is a team that's at large worthy. And then they, things don't go their way. They lose the Patriot League and they're out. This year, we don't talk about any of that stuff.
No, thank God.
They finally get the job done. So it's, it's just kind of funny how you think about those things. And, I don't think it's impossible to think that there's a little bit of benefit for a team kind of going under the radar. Coaches always like to talk about how they love to be under the radar. And so, did Army not hearing the chatter about them as an at-large potential team help? Did Jacksonville being a team that no one's talking about help? I don't know. It certainly didn't hurt.
I'm rubbing off on Zach a little bit, talking about all of these emotional type of non-data driven reasons teams might have won or lost. We have a couple highlights here that I do want to get to of teams that you mentioned. Let's throw up Stony Brook first. Shout out to Stony Brook winning the CAA here for the first time. I need to get some data on this. I know it had been like 21 games since Towson had lost a CAA game, but I need to get like the title winners here in the last maybe 5 years. But shout out to Stony Brook. Congratulations on this win.
The Stony Brook Seawolves are CAA champions in 2026 as they upset Towson 13-11.
Incredible. Congratulations, Coach Anthony Gallardi. Just amazing. Heartbreaking for Towson, Matt Nyland. What a career for Mikey Weishar. Congratulations on tying the goal record with me. Young man, you had an incredible career here at Towson. It was a joy to watch you play for 4 years. And best of luck to you in the PLL.
Oh, that hurt. That hurt. The shout out to Mikey Weishar there at the end, White Lightning. Oh my God. Don't bring me to tears. All right, we had the Stony Brook piece. Any mention on this Towson Stony Brook game? We have a couple to get through that of AQs that just went away. We might not have thought.
I think the interesting thing, this was Towson's second worst adjusted efficiency game of the year. So, shout out to the Stony Brook defense. They did the job they had to do, and it was effective. I mean, honestly, you look at the individual player stats, and I just pulled up like Weishar's numbers. He didn't have a bad game. I think this was just a really effective performance from the Stony Brook defense, and that's what it took. I mean, Towson was just plus 30% all year, and this was game they were at 25. The only other game that they were even close to that was against Fairfield. So it's a bittersweet way to end the season for Towson for sure, but certainly their defense was fine. It was just Stony Brook defense did the job.
Yeah, in a big game, man. That's congratulations to that team. That does suck for a Towson team that kind of put it on late in the season. I know they had some like mid-season mess ups here, but Towson was looking good. They were at number 16 in the media poll before losing the CAA championship game. LIU, Robert Morris. You mentioned Bobby Moe. Let's go to their game winner. This hurts me. I'm a big fan of LIU. Kyle Hayes is a big fan of the show. He's the offensive coordinator for Long Island, and the Sharks missing out on their championship by 1 goal.
Benek. 5. Shimmies. Gives it off. McLennan, and it goes!
All right, so Bobby Moe winning that one. That was the last second goal, by the way. Maybe a second or two left on the shot clock. We had an Air Force take out another of my favorites, Utah. Here we're not going to get to see Utah in the tournament. That's really upsetting to me. I thought they had some really good talent. Air Force just putting it together. That's a crazy win for them. I need to go back to Air Force's schedule, but they were having a rough season. And I know they maybe they won some here late in they did. Bellarmine, I mean, they ran roughshod over the A-Sun basically, but they beat Utah 2 games in a row to end their season.
Yeah, that rivalry has been one of the best. And I think that it was another 1-goal game. That's now 5 in a row. I think that Air Force has beat Utah by 1 goal, which is kind of absurd to think about.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it is. I think the scale of the Jacksonville win over Air Force was a little surprising. Like, that's a gritty team in Air Force it seems like every year they're the one that ends up kind of getting on top of that heap. And you wonder if 2 straight games against one of your bitter rivals that you win by 1 goal just took it out of them. Because I mean, to lose to Jacksonville by 9 is a little bit of a surprise.
Yeah. All right, we've got the last AQ here that we want to touch on. That was basically not one of these larger games. Albany taking on Vermont. This is a little bit of a tearjerker. Look, I want to give the room to kind of Scott Marr here to preach. This was post game after the Albany game.
This is probably the most satisfying one, to be honest. We've had a lot of adversity this year with Coach Gleason. We had a player lose his father. We had players lose their friends, their best friends. I think we had 8 or 9 deaths throughout the course of the year associated with people in our program. Seems like every time we turned around, it was we were consoling somebody through a tragedy. And again, my team's resilience and sticking together and finding a way to win today. I thought this was the hardest championship that we've ever had to win.
All right, big love to Scott Marr there. Always runs a great program up there in Albany, New York. The Great Danes getting it done, 14-11 over Vermont. Let me give him the box score. What did old Silas Richmond here do? Only 7 points for Silas. Brendan O'Keefe with 2. Ryan Doherty with 7 points as well, 5 goals, 2 assists. Any last pieces? The only other one I want to touch on before we make it to the last games that are kind of like in the seeding piece is the Richmond game. Do you have anything for Albany or Vermont, Zach?
No, I mean, it's, shout out to Albany, and it is tough. You have, I didn't realize they had so many, tragic events going on around that program. It's, it's good to see those guys come out of it and have success. And I'm sure the bonds of that team are going to be strong ones even going into the future.
All right, here we've made it to the last in, last out, or first out, however you want to call it. We basically had Maryland not make the tournament for the first time since 2002. That's going to hurt Zach. That is going to hurt him. He's a big Maryland fan. But we also had some last ins, last out. Ohio State, I don't know how they were even mentioned on the bubble. I think even the Ohio State players, after that game that they lost, I believe, to Michigan in the Big Ten conference games, they were like, season's over. But Harvard is one of the last out or first out. Yale is in. So just give me the kind of breakdown of how the bubble turned out. Not much drama. I felt like we kind of were right on the money. I know Duke was one that was there, but they ended up getting in. But tell me a little bit about this first in, last out.
Yeah, I mean, there's a big, we talked about this a couple weeks ago. The whole, if you end up number 20 versus number 21 in the RPI, that's like a huge deal. And, that's one thing that happened is that Duke, and we even said this, there was about a 27% chance that this was going to happen. Even a couple weeks ago, that St. Joe's was going to end up number 20 in the RPI. And they did, right? Because Lehigh beat BU and a bunch of stuff happened. And then St. Joe's ends up number 20. As a result, now Duke has a second top 20 RPI victory. And then you've got a team like Harvard, who BU had been a top 20 victory for them, so now they don't have it. Yale's got the head-to-head over Harvard. It's tough. One of the things that I was interested to hear was when Terry wrote an article about how, like, I guess the committee's process is generally to just go down the RPI list and say, okay, is the team that we're looking at objectively have a better resume than the team below them? And so, I don't know if that's exactly how it worked out, but Harvard was the 15th RPI team. So, like, I guess it's conceivable that they didn't even get a hearing, right? Because you could get to the point that, okay, now we're choosing between Yale and Maryland, and we never mentioned Harvard, which is kind of a bummer because, like, if you look at their resume and outside of just what their pure RPI says, their resume was actually a little bit better than Yale's and Maryland. So, I was surprised to hear that because I think, like, and again, it goes back to the idea of the arbitrariness of the process. But it sounds like what happened is they put Duke in, and then it was a question of Yale versus Maryland, and they said Yale's got that top 5 win and Maryland doesn't, and I guess that was how it played out.
Yeah, I'm going to read a quote here from the podcast that Terry Foy did with that individual, Matthew. That's a tough name. Calo Giovanni. I totally butchered it, but again, committee head of the chair of the committee that did the seating. This is his thoughts here, addressing the head-to-head resume between two bubble teams. I would say those are the two we probably spent the most time with. I'm guessing he's talking about Yale and Maryland. It was obviously really challenging because Maryland had a really difficult schedule. Ultimately, it probably came down to one more win for them. They obviously had a gauntlet of a schedule, but when you look at where Yale was, we just felt they had 9 wins. They had a very good average loss. Strength of schedule is a little bit more in favor of Maryland, but overall, when you look at where they were, it's tough with 2 really tough teams. Maryland, we felt, was probably 1 win away. And then you talk about the win that they could have had. I just say could because anything could happen. They're Maryland. They're going to be in big games. They didn't have the Richmond game rescheduled. Richmond win might have taken them over the top.
I mean, a Richmond win certainly would have.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think there's any doubt that a Richmond win would have got them in. Their RPI doesn't change if they would have lost to Richmond. So I guess it's one of those things that, like, the narrative around that team would be totally different if they had beat Richmond, right? So it's like, it is what I don't know. I guess I look at that and say, like, the Maryland team that showed up this year probably wasn't going to beat Richmond anyway. And it's not like if they had lost to Richmond, somehow their resume would have been so much better that they'd still have a better strength of schedule and not, the same profile as Yale. So I don't know. I guess I look at it like, if I'm a Maryland fan, I'm not saying, oh man, I really wish we had played and lost to Richmond because then we'd be
sure.
Good, right? That's not the reality. But it's wild though that they talk about, like, to have him quote that Yale had 9 wins. Like, okay, their last 2 wins were Fairfield and Hofstra. Like, is he really saying that Yale got in because they beat Yale or Fairfield?
I think, dude, people that are not Duke fans would say the same thing of like, hey, they won games, and there were some tough games. You mentioned the top 20 win being St. Joe's right at the end, but maybe there is something to what you're talking about where it's just you won. They obviously favored that. It feels like.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, honestly, like, I think even like Maryland and Yale were pretty close, right? Like,
yeah.
I think it's, on the one hand, like, if you take the Fairfield and Hofstra win off the board, the model that I use to sort of project the committee decisions would have had Maryland ahead of Yale. So, like, in one sense, like, I think Yale should get credit for winning those games, right? You schedule a game, you win it, there's a chance you lose it. If they had lost either of those games, they'd be out for sure. So on the one hand, like, it's kind of cool to hear them say, like, a game, even though it's not a marquee game, did factor into the decision. Now, I mean, were they really sitting there thinking about, like, well, but they beat Hofstra? Like, probably not. But I think that sort of thing should be a part of it. Like, you should get credit for beating bad teams. Not much, but some. And those two profiles were so similar in terms of, the overall sort of rating that the model gave them that, I think it's kind of cool that maybe those 2 games put them over the edge. Again, I don't think that's really what happened, but it's sort of, it's interesting when the model and sort of the numbers align with what ended up happening, even if it wasn't for that reason.
we're going to touch on the rest of the seeding and how it kind of shook out. Princeton getting the number 1 seed over Notre Dame is definitely something to touch on. But Harvard and Ohio State being the first out here along with Maryland, I believe those were the three. It doesn't feel like we had that much of a debate. Like we're not having any like, let's expand the tournament or this needs to be addressed or anything like that. It felt like the guys who did not get in, the teams that did not get in, had all teams that you could point to that it kind of slipped up in various points. Maryland probably is the least. I would say like has the most room for debate just because they finished their season stronger than Ohio State and Harvard.
I think Harvard, if anyone has if you had asked me who the first team out, would be Harvard, right? Like because again, I mean, the extent that they weren't really considered because their RPI was 15th. I mean, their resume ranked 11th. They were after Duke. The only reason that my model had Yale in was that Yale had the head-to-head. And so like, I don't even love the head-to-head. If I was the king of this, I would have had Harvard probably in that spot based on the criteria. I think Harvard probably has a little bit of a stronger argument than even Maryland. Like if you compare their losses, like they had one less on average. Their losses were to much more difficult teams than Maryland's were. Their wins were just a little bit better than Maryland's. Like I think if there's anybody that has a real argument, it's probably Harvard.
Let me explain myself a little bit. I think you're right when it comes to just looking at the overall seedings and things like that. They have some really quality wins. Obviously, the Q's win stands out. Q's. I mean, I guess they beat Boston, but that ended up not being a great win for them. As good a win as they would have liked. I guess my piece on this is just the locker room and the team in general. If you lose 5 of your last 6 games, you can't sit there and be like, man, we got gypped. You know, I think at the end of the day, if you go, you got to win some of these games in order to not feel completely gypped at the end of the season. You finish the season going 1 for 6 or 1 for 5.
But like, why are we privileging recent games over earlier games?
I know, and I'm not a big fan of that either. I'm just talking about like the teams feel in the locker room. I know what you're talking about on the seeding perspective. I am totally with you with then we shouldn't play February games.
You like Lars is. Oh, we just lost to Maryland. The season is in the tank, and he's like, I felt a spark, like And so I don't think there's any necessarily reason that like. I think the argument of like you should have won more games if you wanted to get in the tournament is always valid. Yeah. I don't think it's necessarily you should have won recent games to get into the tournament.
Yeah. I'm just talking about the guys' feeling of like, man, we miss out. I know what you're talking about getting in. I think you're completely right. I think Harvard might have a say, but it's right there, neck and neck.
I guess it does depend. It depends on the locker room, right? Because the dynamic, I could easily see the dynamic being we were robbed of a chance to prove that the last 5 games were not who we are, right? Yeah. You could imagine there's a certain type of person and a certain type of locker room that's maybe more upset in that situation than, hey, we gave it our all. We played well at the end of the season. The numbers didn't work out.
And it just didn't work. Yes. Anyways, let's touch on a couple of these other games. We have AQ misses, bubble in, bubble out. Duke, I guess we can mention in this breath, they were the last in, I would say, if you want to go that far. The St. Joe's one, I think you mentioned really well. This is what the committee had to say. I would want to mention that we really took a deep dive at a cluster of about 4 teams. It was Duke, Maryland, Yale, and Harvard. We spent a lot of time looking at them. In reference to Duke overall, we looked at their 9 wins. Talking about wins again here, Zach. Obviously, their full body of work, average loss being 5. Obviously, their RPI being 10. We looked at that. We took some consideration of what the coaches on the regional advisory committee considered and where they put them from their end. So overall, we looked at the body of work when it came to them. That's kind of a cop-out. That's just basically saying like everything. We took everything into consideration. No crap, you did. You took everything into consideration. Your thoughts on that comment? They did follow up with another question talking about picking Duke set a precedent on scheduling. And then there's a comment, but
I feel like this whole thing about Duke's schedule is so divorced from their schedule was slightly worse than Yale's. I didn't hear anybody argue about Yale's schedule. Like Duke's non-conference schedule was a couple spots behind Yale's. It was not like 50 spots behind Yale's. I don't know. I think the conversation around Duke's schedule was just very overblown. And it's interesting because I feel like one of my critiques with the way that the committee has worked in the past sometimes is that a win over a number 21 ranked team is essentially invisible. And so, Duke had 5 wins over teams that were between 20 and 21 and 40. I think and like we talked about with Yale, like I don't think any win should have a positive value to your resume. I think that honestly with Duke, I think the bigger argument for Duke is the lack of bad losses, right? Like they had 4 losses. It was Virginia, Syracuse, Cornell, and Notre Dame. All the other 4 teams that we talked about in this conversation, Maryland's they had 6 losses. Yale had a loss to number 16 Penn. Harvard had the loss to Yale that was 5th, who was 12th. All of them had at least 5 losses. I think if it was a situation where like Duke's wins were objectively terrible, they wouldn't have been given that same benefit of the doubt. But if you add up the wins and you look at the RPI of the teams they beat, I mean, they had 182 points from their victories. Harvard had 185 points from their victories. It's not like Duke's wins were like against nobodies. They stacked up against Harvard's win just as well. So I think the idea that there's some precedent that was set because Duke's non-conference was 4 spots worse than Yale's, I don't know. It just doesn't strike me as like they didn't do something wrong here.
All right, we got a little bit of a move here that we got to make with our bodies here on the camera. But you can see here or we could go in now. We got the championship bracket here. Princeton getting that number 1 seed over Notre Dame. We'll touch on that in just a second. Richmond gets Duke here, a hot Duke like we were talking about. They obviously didn't play in the ACC tournament. That to me, I mean, that obviously sticks out. Richmond getting this number 4 seed, them picking between that and North Carolina. North Carolina's likely, I mean, if everything shakes out, they're going to play Syracuse in the next game. But Yale again, upstart. When I looked at this bracket, I put it on my Instagram story. I feel like Princeton would have been okay with the number 2 seed.
Definitely.
When I look at this, I'm like, Penn State is probably the scariest team in the bracket, and Princeton gets to play them if they get through the first game. That's what stood out to me.
About last week, you asked me for the predictions, and I said, well, I think Penn State's one of the teams that's going to make the Final Four because they're the 3rd strongest team in the ELO ratings right now, and they almost missed, but then they won the Big Ten emphatically. I think Princeton got by far the roughest draw. I think Carolina is the one that probably, it would feel a little bit better about where they ended up. I don't know. It like Notre Dame, it's probably don't love having to play last year's champion that, had been playing pretty hot. I don't know. I think Carolina is the one that you look at. Like that's probably the easiest draw. Princeton by far the toughest of the top 4 seeds.
Yeah, that Penn State Army game. Here's the thing, Penn State has just been all over the map, and we've touched on it. Like, I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but Penn State, let me see their most recent games here. I mean, they've just won emphatically. I guess they beat Maryland 8-6, but they killed Rutgers. They killed Hopkins in the Big Ten championship game. Yeah, it just depends on who shows up. But that Army West Point team is legit. One of our favorites to cover this entire season. So who knows?
You almost get the sense that like Penn State's either going to lose that game by 5 or win it by 10.
Yeah,
and if the team that shows up that lost to Villanova and Navy, and Michigan, if that's the team that shows up, Army might not really have a very difficult day. But I think you got to assume, right? the good team's going to show up for the NCAA tournament game, right? I mean, like, to the extent that it's again, it's hard to explain what's been going on with them, but like, you got to think that like the good version of Penn State's going to be the one that you see in the NCAA tournament.
Like there's no excuse. It's not, oh, hey, it's our first game, or hey, this happened, it's a rival. No, it's tournament time. Talk about Georgetown, and we've made this comment with Richmond where we talked about them up front. Richmond was number 1 seed or number 1 ranked, all this stuff. They had a couple big games up front, and then we didn't talk about them for a month and a half.
Yeah.
Georgetown hasn't played a big game, I would say. If you can say the Big East Championship against Providence, but they beat them by 8 there. Their last top-ranked opponent would have been Syracuse, that they lost 12-18 in March 20.
Right.
On the 22nd of March, a month and a half ago. So they get to come in playing a hot Virginia team. I don't think they hate that. Like, Virginia has had its blemishes throughout. They've been kind of up and down. But obviously they're on a roll to end the season. What do you think about that Virginia-Georgetown matchup?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we've had this one quite a bit in the first round recently. I mean, Georgetown's defense is 10th in adjusted defense. I think the challenge for them is the face-off game. Like, how many possessions are they going to be able to get against UVA? And now you've got the UVA offense that's been the best offense in the country probably over the last month or so. I think it's one of those things that Georgetown is probably going to have to grind out this game. Can they be even on the face-offs? Their offense is 7th in adjusted efficiency. Their defense is 10th. So it's not like this is not a good 6-on-6 team. But they're 50th in adjusted face-off percentage, right? So I think that's sort of the big question that I have is, if this is a game where Georgetown's able to play UVA to a stalemate in 6-on-6, but UVA has 10 extra possessions, UVA is going to win the game. So I think the face-offs is going to be big in this one. And I don't think it's impossible that you'll see Georgetown play UVA to a stalemate in terms of per possession efficiency, but it's, they've got to do that. And then they've got to, be competitive at the face-offs.
All right, we've got a couple highlights here that I failed to play while we were talking about this, but shout out to Penn State for being this cardiac throughout the season and this volatile. But they won the Big Ten championship. All right, we got a Penn State here victory in the championship. Obviously, that secures them a date with the Army. We also had this Richmond team and UNC here. Richmond getting the number 4 seed while UNC slotted into number 3. For all this is from the Inside Lacrosse article. We've got, besides the potential for the best atmosphere in the first round, it's a tough game that could have been avoided if Richmond bumped up 1 more seed. The Spiders had a better RPI, 2 more wins, and a top 5 win. UNC had the best strength of schedule and 2 more quality wins than the Spiders. Ultimately, that made the difference. Let me quickly play one of the last few highlights we've got. Richmond taking down St. Joe's. This was closer than we would have thought. St. Joe's having a good end to their season, but Richmond taking them down to win the A10.
She's in on the rebound.
And Lucas Littlejohn finding the rebound on the crease, the son of a longtime pro hockey player who did a little bit of work at the edge of the crease on skates.
All right, we had Richmond there. Any complaints from Richmond on this one, Zach, when it comes to getting seeded 4th versus 3rd?
I mean, not particularly. I think, the committee doesn't just go straight RPI. Like, I think we saw in the women's bracket, it's not, I think there's this misperception that if your RPI is higher, they're going to put you higher. I mean, Carolina's wins were significantly better than Richmond's when you look at the totality of those. I mean, Carolina had 5 top 10 wins, Richmond had 2. So, their wins rated better. The losses did hurt. I mean, if anything, like, the interesting thing is that Notre Dame ranked below both of those 2 teams in terms of resume strength. And so, which is partly because they played so few games. So I think, if anything, I don't think the Richmond argument is that we should have been ranked higher than Carolina. I don't think they should have. I think both of those two teams probably have an argument that they should have been ranked ahead of Notre Dame. But that's probably not a decision that the committee was making in the room. I assume they just said, hey, Notre Dame, it's going to be Notre Dame or Princeton for 1, and the other one's going to be 2. And now we have to decide between these two teams for 3 and 4. And I think if that's the decision they made, I think Carolina ahead of Richmond is probably the right one.
All right, we've got a Notre Dame team sitting here at number 2 in this seeding. They only had 2 losses all year, both to Virginia. They get rewarded with the number 2 seed. I think looking at Princeton in Notre Dame, I would love for you to break that down here in a second, Zach. But now I get to say Notre Dame winning the national championship. Now I don't get to be like a front runner.
Yeah.
Now I get to actually be like, oh, I'm just kind of stepping out on a ledge. But they lost 15-10 in the semis. They didn't even make it to the championship game. They've had a dominant year outside of their 2 games to Virginia. They had played a close game to Duke. They beat Richmond. I mean, tough to say this isn't one of the better schedules as far as victories and all that outside of their 2 losses to UVA here. But yeah, give me a little bit about Notre Dame to end the year and then how they got scheduled next to Princeton.
Yeah. I mean, their outlook is just, are they going to see UVA, right? Because it wouldn't happen. I guess it wouldn't happen until the finals. So I guess that's a good thing. But I mean, against everyone who's not UVA, this has been a world-beating team this year. And so, I think ultimately to have Princeton kind of come away with that Ivy League tournament championship and Notre Dame kind of go out in the first round of the ACC tournament, I don't have any problem with them being number 2. I mean, again, when you compare the resumes and you look at the quality of the wins and the quality of the losses, Princeton did have. I mean, their wins were significantly better, and their lone loss is kind of rated at the same level of Notre Dame. So, I mean, I think it's the right call to have Princeton ahead. But it's are we talking about non-UVA Notre Dame here, or are we talking about UVA Notre Dame here? Because to the extent that UVA has just been a bad matchup for them, I mean, their offensive efficiency was 9 percentage points worse against UVA than it was against everybody else. Their
in both games. That's an average between both games.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Yeah, their defensive efficiency was what is that? I mean, 11 percentage points worse against UVA than it was against everybody else. Their face-off win rate 9 percentage points worse against UVA than it was against everybody else. So I guess from a scouting perspective, do you look at that and say, well, all any of Notre Dame's opponents are going to do is just watch UVA film, or is it something that's unique to the way that UVA's plays and the personnel they have that allows them to just to have that success against Notre Dame? I don't know, but
who knows?
It's a wild split to see those kind of disparities, and where it's only one team on the other side of it.
Yeah, Princeton getting the number 1 seed here. Let me play that highlight. This is the last highlight we have. Congratulations to Princeton. I mean, they had look, if you remove that first game on their schedule, easily they deserve to be number 1 as far as when it comes to just having the full season of success.
Right.
They played a 13-11 loss to Cornell in the middle of their season, but when you just look at it, they had great wins, no bad losses. There's no argument, I think, that anybody could say, hey, this team does not deserve to be number 1 seed in the land.
In high school, moved to defense. Moved him to long pole and then close defense. Became a first-team All-American. That's nasty.
Cal Keel with a hat trick.
That's a second midfield again.
Remember I told you he was an ex-attackman in high school? He used to just live behind the goal. And this is like one of those Chris Kavanaugh.
That's an Owen Duffy flying question mark.
Yeah, but Owen Duffy before him was Chris Kavanaugh and Rob.
That goal was to go up 19 to not a lot from Cornell. They ended up 19-9 at the end of this one. This was a home game, by the way, basically for Cornell up in Ithaca, New York. 19-9. That has been a vicious offense all year.
Mm-hmm.
They have some great defenders too. You got Jack Stahl on the defensive side. A tough team, a deserved number 1 for the most part. Give me anything you got here on Princeton as they roll into the tournament.
Yeah, I mean, number 2 offense in the country, number 11 on defense. I mean, I think that's the piece that is probably a little underappreciated for them, is that the defense has been pretty strong. And over, this was 17% defensive efficiency against Cornell. They were 12 against Syracuse. So they've had some really effective defensive games. And then you've got an offense that literally 54% adjusted efficiency against Cornell is a crazy number. And so, it's peaking at the right time a little bit for them. I know that it had been a while since they had beat Cornell, I think. So there was a little bit of a, kind of monkey off the back situation going on there. But like you said, I mean, the depth of the victories, the fact that they didn't have the bad losses. I mean, certainly a deserving top seed. And, they'll get to sit there and wait and watch the winner of, I mean, certainly they got to win their first round game. They'll play Marist or Stony Brook, but then probably a pretty juicy quarterfinal matchup between them and whoever comes out of that Penn State Army game.
Yeah, I think both of us saying again that that's probably the toughest draw on this schedule, other than Richmond getting Duke to start at number 4. But look, we'll see if what happens with the rest of that. We got Robert Morris taking on Jacksonville. The winner of that takes on Notre Dame. I love what you talked about with Coach. Oh my God, I just blanked. Not Coach Galloway. I wanted to say Coach Johnson. It's Coach John Galloway over at Jacksonville doing a great job. That's a lot of J's in there. You can confuse me. But yeah, great job, Coach Galloway at Jacksonville. I would love to see some postseason success. If that just means beating Bobby Moe and taking it to Notre Dame, I love it. Let's see what we got. The last teams we have not touched on in this bracket, Syracuse, a team that has obviously a bunch of fanfare about it, was rated number 1 at multiple times this season. They roll in at number 6 on the schedule. They get to play a pretty hot Yale team. Tell me a little bit about that, and then we'll go into Cornell Hop to round it out. But yes, Syracuse sit at 6.
I think it is. It's probably a tough, I don't know. I guess you look at is this a team that's going to be able to kind of bounce back and foxhole mentality? And, the season didn't end the way they wanted to. And now we've got a chance to kind of make it right. I'm sure they would love to get another crack at Carolina. But I mean, at the same time, Yale's a team that they were beating, they were ahead in that semifinal game. And they've been one of the best teams over the last couple weeks of the season. So, that's definitely one where statistically you'd think Syracuse probably has the edge, but if you just looking at the stats over the last month, I think it's a lot closer. It's going to be a tough game. I mean, and to the extent that it's not being played in the Dome, does that mean that Yale's going to have a little bit of an extra advantage? It's a tough game. I mean, they're going to have to
hear me out. It says Syracuse, New York on here. Is it? It might be.
That's right. Sorry. Yes. No. Correct. Yeah. First round games on campus. So that one will be in the Dome.
Yeah.
So cancel that piece. But I still think. I mean, Yale's a tough team. They played really well. Syracuse is not gonna be able to kind of walk over that one.
No.
You compare that to a Virginia game where I think these are a little bit similar, right? I mean, Georgetown strong team, statistically pretty good. Yale strong team, statistically pretty good. For some reason, it just feels like that Virginia game. And again, maybe it's because we've seen Georgetown play UVA in the first round a couple times, and UVA has been able to get through those games. I don't know. It just I feel like if I was either Virginia looking at Georgetown or Syracuse looking at Yale, I'd be a little more bummed to have Yale on my schedule.
Yeah, I agree with that. And Syracuse did not have success with the Ivy League this year. They did, I believe, beat Penn 9-8. So that's a close game against a solid Penn team, but not a ranked Penn team, I believe, at the time. And then they lost to Harvard and Princeton, both in close games there. Yeah, they lost to Notre Dame, North Carolina to end the season, crashing out in the semis against UNC. So, yeah, tough bid here for Syracuse. They also have to, if they get through Yale, Zach, they have to play UNC again. Another one of those back-to-back losses in a season. They lost to North Carolina twice. So, maybe they don't love where they ended up. Maybe they wanted to be in that Cornell 7th seed. who knows? We'll see how that
I mean,
all
the flip
plays out.
side, it's a new season. It's the Ncaa tournament. Incentives are a little different.
In the
you got a little bit
dome.
you got I'm even thinking ahead if they're able to get past Yale and they do take on UNC. Like it's hard to be a team 3 times in one season. So, I guess to me, new season, everything's new. We've got NCAA tournament games coming.
Where does that analogy or whatever term you want to associate that, where does that stop? Like it's tough to beat a team 4 times. It's tough to beat a team 5. At some point, it's just literally, it's not that tough to beat a team 6 times because you're obviously very much better than that team. But yes, hard to beat a team 3 times. We'll see if they can put that to the test.
The extent that Duffy is going to be limited, that does change the calculus for any UNC matchup going forward.
What is the gap between games in the NCAA tournament? Do we know? Is it a week?
Yeah, the first one will be a week. I think they'll play like Saturday and then the next Friday, Saturday, and then the next Friday, Saturday, I want to say.
Okay. So that helps. I mean, again, hamstrings are very, very funky injuries, but they get to play Albany first. Maybe they rest Owen Duffy in that game. Albany could totally be a team that sneaks one, but you'd like to think they would handle business there, even without Owen Duffy. So we'll be watching that one. All right, last team we have not touched on before we get out of here. We're at the hour mark. Uh-oh. Did I lose? Oh, no. Okay, we're good. Cornell Hopkins. Cornell coming in at the number 1 seed for some people at the beginning of the season, I think. No, they weren't. They weren't a consensus number 1. They weren't even the number 1 seed on the first media poll. Who was? Princeton?
I don't remember.
Ooh, this is a really good. I'm going to look at this while Zach tells us about Cornell Hopkins in that matchup.
This is another one where I think Cascadon is probably a big aspect of what's going to go down in this one. I mean, Cornell's ranked 4th in adjusted faceoff win rate. Hopkins is 34th. The per possession numbers are pretty close. So I think this is one where Hopkins is going to have to battle and make sure that they don't end up with a 7-8 possession disadvantage. They also, we'll see what that injury is like to Kilrain. I think he got hurt in that Penn State game in the Big Ten tournament. So it's another one where you're just not really quite sure if the personnel is going to be the same personnel we've seen all season. But it's not an easy game by any means, but I don't think you'd look at that and say oh, Cornell's going to be at home. They've got this big statistical edge. I think that one's probably going to be a pretty tight game as long as Hopkins can keep it close at the dot.
All right, we've got a question from the community. Then I've got a hell of a preseason poll for you guys. We got Daniel saying, what does Zach think about expanding the field to 24?
I mean, I'm not a huge fan. I love that the NCAA tournament is a reward for a successful season, right? It makes the regular season games a lot more meaningful. I think all the teams that were bubble out, right? You could envision a world where they go on a run and maybe they would be able to get there. I think if you get to 24, right, that's a third of NCAA lacrosse, right? And this is beyond the question of the NCAA has rules about how many teams can be in the tournament. They're not going to expand it because there's not enough spots, right? There's a limit on how many teams you can have in your field. If you have 77 teams, you're limited to essentially 18 teams. So it's beyond the idea of is it even possible? I don't love it. I just think it should be a reward, and it's not about we want to just have this huge tournament that everybody gets in like basketball. I think there's something cool about a relatively small number where making the NCAA tournament is a successful season in a lot of ways. So yeah. I don't know. I'm never a big fan of expanding it and kind of diluting what it means.
One of the least, I could see a play-in. A commenter has talked about what if they had a Maryland Yale play-in? That would have been fun. I could see a little bit of that. I agree with you on not kind of diluting the product of being this game matters here, but really no drama this year. I don't even think the Maryland fans are up that much in an uproar, to be honest. All right, I've got a couple comments. Some of the comments did not come through on our platform here, so I apologize on it. But Daniel was saying Maryland deserves at least a play-in. Weston was saying, did I miss the Duke-Maryland combo? Also saying Silas Richmond, not one to sleep on. Did I miss the Duke-Maryland combo? Yeah, that was definitely a lot earlier. I might be able to get you a Spark Notes for that. Speaking of Maryland, they were the preseason number one. 17 of the 20-ish odd media members put Maryland at number one. They do not even make the tournament. Princeton, a lone media member, chose Princeton for the number one seed. 4 media members had Cornell at number one, and then 1 media member had North Carolina up at number one. That was the preseason poll there. So, yeah, Maryland. Yikes. Starting number one, not making the tournament. That's you don't really see that much in a sport like lacrosse.
Yeah.
You just don't. I loved the parity that we got to see throughout the season, though, show up in this postseason schedule. There's a lot of games here where you're just like, oh, they could sneak one. Yale could sneak one. Hopkins could easily beat Cornell. I think Notre Dame probably has who has the easiest draw here, Zach, before we run out? As far as like their first few games.
I think you'd have to say Carolina probably. I mean, they get a Syracuse team they've already beat twice.
Okay.
They've got Yale in there. Notre Dame's is not a bad one, especially to the extent that injuries are going to hamper Hopkins a little bit. But I think that just for Richmond to have Virginia in there is tough. Princeton obviously has Penn State in there, which is tough. I think Carolina is probably the one that you'd look at and say, like, okay, we feel probably pretty confident about being able to come out of there.
Yeah, we've also got a Virginia battle on tilt. I didn't even notice till I started looking at it in totality. You potentially have a Richmond Virginia matchup there in the quarters. That's pretty cool. Yeah. All right, this has been a great episode as we wind down, a little kind of wind up, but also get to the back half and back end of the season. Really awesome stuff, man. I've enjoyed our episodes throughout the season. Anything that you have off the dome that you want to kind of get to the folks out there? Appreciate you guys joining us either live or afterwards. We appreciate you guys. Thank you.
So first and foremost, make sure you go do a bracket challenge. We want to get a good group. We usually have a couple hundred. I think we got up to 700 D1 brackets one year. So let's try and get some more.
Oh, we're busting through that.
But I think one thing to close with, selection algorithms is a big thing in some circles these days. And one of the things that I thought was interesting is NPI is the one that they use in D3 for the last 2 years. D2 is going to use it next year. USA Lacrosse Magazine had their whole big article on Lars's PowerWise system. NPI is a system we already have that D3 has used successfully for 2 years. One of the things I know that people are always a little curious about with algorithms and how they do the process is, what's it going to mean from a selection process? Well, so the last 4 teams they talked about, right? Duke, Yale, Harvard, that's who was on the bubble. Duke and Yale end up getting in. NPI, if we had used the NPI selection process, we would have had 8 exactly the same home teams hosting. The last 2 teams who got in would have been the same. It would have been Duke and Yale. We have this other system. It works fine. It would have produced the same exact outcome.
Like to a T.
Yeah. Like some of the seedings would have been a little bit different.
Yeah. Was there anyone that stood out seeding wise different? You don't have to answer.
Penn State would have been a little bit higher. UVA would have been 8th instead of 5th where they were at. NPI, if it would have been Notre Dame, Princeton, Richmond. So they would have flipped the first 2 seeds. And then Richmond would have been 3rd, and Carolina, Cornell, Q's, Penn State, Virginia. And then it would have had Hopkins on the road.
Got it. All right. Appreciate you guys joining us for this one. We will see you next week as the postseason unfolds. Can't wait to talk about the results. Thank you for tuning in all the way through. We'll see you next week.
Indeed.